This is what I would usually see poor core strength look like. So this is my little man Hugh when he was a baby. And you can see he liked to sit up, but he didn't sit up very well. He wanted to sit up because that was his happy place. He still is quite a chatterbox. So he would sit up in that position and babble his babble away. While it was good that he was sitting up and babbling and building those social skills and language skills, it's not great for his core strength to be seated in that position for long periods of time. So what I used to do when he was little was he'd have time of sitting up, and obviously I'd have to keep readjusting those cushions to keep him sitting up. But then he'd also have time of tummy time. So you'll hear me talk a lot about tummy time tonight. Tummy time is crucial for children who have poor core strength. It's crucial for all of us, really. But you can see when children are sitting floppy, then we want to encourage extra tummy time. And extra tummy time could just be 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long planned activity. It could just be changing up to position against gravity for 2 minutes is better than none at all. The middle position is W sitting. Now, W sitting is one position that I just want to clarify the age of when W sitting becomes a problem. So W sitting in general for an 18-month-old is typical. The reason why 18-month-old little babies usually sit in this position is they prop back into a W sitting position and then they go to crawl again. And it's in that crawling movement, they're already in a crawling position, that they prop back into W sitting position. For an 18-month-old, they have an attention span of about 30 seconds to a minute if you can get them engaged for that long. So they're not sitting in this W sitting position for very long. Up to 2 minutes, maybe possibly when they're 18 months old, they'd typically sit in this position. Where if we have a 3 or 4-year-old sitting in this position, 7, 8, and 9-year-old sitting in this position, you can appreciate how long they're holding this W sitting position for. And that's where the challenge comes into play. I'm just going to show you what it looks like, why we're concerned with this particular shape. So I'm going to get out my drawing tool. It's the W sitting that we know very well, the W position that we know very well. If you look at when we're sitting in cross-legged position, we typically sit with our bottom on the ground and then we sit with our outer ankles crossed. Each ankle is on each side of our body. Bottom sitting on the ground, side of our ankle is touching the ground. But if you look at W sitting position, this picture of Isla has her thigh touching her shin touching the ground, her thigh touching the ground, her bottom touching the ground, her thigh touching the ground, her shin touching the ground. The concern that we have here is that her core muscles aren't getting a workout. Her core muscles aren't holding her up in this W sitting position. Her legs are. Her legs are creating that larger surface area. When we have a larger surface area, the rest of the body is on holiday. Similar to, if you can imagine, when we're slouching back in our chair and my chair is holding me upright, I can hold this position for a lot longer than if I'm standing on one foot with just the base of my foot being my surface area. So when we look at the body, the more surface area we have touching the ground, the less effort for the body. The least amount of surface area, 1 foot, 2 hands and 2 feet in a bridge position, then it takes more effort from the body. But if our torso is laying on the ground or our thighs are taking our body weight, our muscles aren't working as hard as they could be. So what the challenge we have in W sitting is this vicious cycle. We sit typically in W sitting because we have poor core strength, because we can't maintain this cross the leg position, or our hamstrings are too tight to have a straight out leg position. So we sit back in our W sitting position because our core muscles aren't strong enough to sit. And then this W sitting position further impacts the strength of our core. The other challenge that we have with our friendly W sitting is the position of Isla's feet. If you look at Isla's feet right there, they're in what we call plantar flexion. If you imagine when you plant your foot in your car, you're pushing your foot onto the throttle. You're tippy-toeing onto the throttle of your car. Isla is sitting in a position where her feet are plantar flexed. They're tippy-toed. They're in a tippy-toe position. So you'll often find a number of children who W sit also walk on their tippy toes because their feet are used to that plantar flexed or flexed position. This is dorsiflexion. This is the opposite position. and this is plantar flexion. And what we often find, children who W sit find challenges with walking on their heels properly because their body is used to being in that tippy toe posture. So when we look at W sitting, not just about core strength, also about foot position, also about hip health. Our hips aren't designed to be externally rotated like that for a long period of time. Of course, children don't have that pain yet. They have really healthy, brand new joints. But as they become adults, they then may start to have their hips impacted. So we want to try and reduce this W sitting position as much as possible. Please, if you have any questions, please slow me up because I know this can be a lot to take in. The third picture here for Hugh is you can see that he's leaning on the table. I'll just move our little photos over to this side. And you can see that Hugh's leaning on the table and his feet are tucked in underneath. A few things we see here. Last week I shared the infantile reflex video. So there's reflexes at play in this video. I'll chat about the core strength first, and then I'll give you a few tips into the reflexes while we're here. While we have this photo up, we might as well observe it for all that it's worth. So when we see children leaning on to the table, it's usually showing us that we don't have the core strength to hold ourselves up against gravity. There's similar children who, when they sit at group time, will sit up against shelving units, or they'll sit up against you or a pier or the wall. It's because we're struggling to hold ourselves up against gravity, another sign that we have poor core strength. A further challenge that we have with children with poor core strength is they're usually not as active. So children like Hugh found exercise, movement, so challenging that we often avoided it. How he avoided it was by sitting at the craft table or the handwriting table, fine motor table. He spent a lot of his time because he didn't have to move if he sat there. Rarely out in the playground, up and down A-frames, usually also in the sandpit. Sandpit's quite a sedentary play space in the outdoor play space. So a lot of our W sitters, children with poor core strength, you'll find them in the sandpit as well. When we're sitting sedentary, not playing on bikes, climbing, running, then what you can imagine is we also may keep our reflexes. So the infantile reflexes that we're born with, we integrate and get rid of through movement. But if we're not moving our body enough, if we're not moving our head, moving our core, then those reflexes are staying put. The reflexes are designed as a baby to get us to move, but if we're not actually moving and achieving those milestones, the reflexes stay. So I want to show you there's two key reflexes three actually, that Hugh's got in this particular picture. And I'll just share them with you. I know it's not core strength, but why not? It's this particular reflex that I call it's called the gallant reflex. There's a gap here between Hugh and the back of the chair. The gallant reflex is all about stimulating the back of a child's spine, and it encourages them to roll. So if a child lays on a rug and the rug's texture tickles their spine, it makes the baby wriggle and makes the baby want to roll and get it off the back of their spine. Their spine is getting tickled and it wants to avoid that. We see children who still have this reflex. If I take my pointer finger and I draw a line down the bones of their spine, so down the vertebrae of their spine, and if I see them wriggle to my pointer finger, we know that the reflex is still there. Because typically if they didn't have the reflex, I'd be able to just draw a line down the spine and I'd get no reaction from the child. But when we do it with a child still with this gallant reflex, they wriggle as you run your finger down their spine. What it means in a classroom is we don't want to lean our back against the chair because the chair is triggering that gallant reflex, making us want to wriggle. We don't want to sit too close to our friends because if our friend rubs their back suddenly, it makes us want to wriggle. Great for babies, not needed for kinder, but children in the kindergarten year still can have this reflex. So we often see them sitting at the front of their chair. We often see them finding it difficult to sit too close to other people. And it's just a simple test, point a finger down their spine, and it's in that infantile reflex video if you need, and it explains it a bit more in more detail. The second reflex that we see here is called the symmetrical tonic neck reflex. Don't stress too much about it. It's a neck reflex, the big long name, that basically means when the head tilts forward, the legs want to extend. Now that's uncomfortable for us. So what we do instead is we tuck them behind this chair leg so our body doesn't keep reacting to our head movement. So if you see children tuck legs behind chairs, it's just trying to manage the reflex, because the body feels that reflex firing off when their head moves, and they just want to try and grab themselves into a position so they don't have to keep feeling that reflex. Children don't subconsciously know they're doing it, but they're doing it through their body movement. Similar to how we spoke about the Moro reflex, where a Moro reflex would be loud sound, let's brace ourselves, because I know that my body is going to send off that Moro reflex soon. So I'll either brace myself by covering my ears, or I'll try and hold up my body because I know that that Moro reflex is going to go off. You'll typically see children still with this neck reflex. They'll tuck their legs in unusual positions on the ground or behind the chair, because when their head goes down, their legs want to extend. Another reflex that you'll see is that the head's turned to the right, so the elbow is stabilizing, trying to keep that still on the left. So you'll see some challenges where the head turns to the right, so see how his whole torso is shifting towards the right. Whereas what we would expect for children who have good core strength, good reflex integration, is they'd be facing directly straight in front of their work. There'd be no awkward twisting type behavior. It'd be nice and relaxed and symmetrical. But what you can see in Hugh is he's very twisted. And I'm sure you'll see lots of this tomorrow when you go back into the classroom, because it's very common to see.